So number one, so Noster.build. So I posted this week something, and it got the attention in particular of my producers, Mike and Pat. Shout out to those guys. An integral part of what I'm building with this podcast is having a top class team. And they were really intrigued by what I talked through, which was essentially, what does it mean when you are the product? Now let's frame this in a more traditional sense initially, which is, it's so easy to talk to my friends using Facebook. And I wind the clock back to like 2000 and let's call it 8, something like that. And I'd left school 2 years before. I was traveling the world, and I was just signing up to Facebook as it had kind of hammered through all the universities, communities in the States. And, we could post photographs more easily than before. And it was just this really fun tool. And suddenly you had a little Facebook profile. You're like, oh, this is great. And really, we're just talking in tiny kind of micro communities, and it's so different what it looks like today. But it was free, right? Or isn't it? And you can just sign up with an email and a password, and off you go. It's transpired over many years now that this is just a classic example where you accepting something as being free, actually you're the product, and it's not immediately obvious why. And so in this case, why are you the product? So if you sign up for, Facebook today or Instagram or YouTube or TikTok or X, the point of these tools is to gather information, to, have entertainment, to learn, to interact with your friends. And it's quote unquote free to have an account. But what they've really become is what I've heard described as a phrase which I quite like, actually, surveillance capitalism. And another way of looking at it is basically like selling your attention. And so, as you'll notice, the Facebook ads or the Instagram ads feed takes a pretty common process. If anyone's ever watched Jab, 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 Punch, which I think is a Gary Vee book, and forgive me if that's the wrong title, but it's something along those lines. And essentially, you want to be offering someone value, and then trying to sell something. And actually, this is a pretty common advertising technique. And so really what these social media companies are is advertising platforms. And so the user is going to be able to sold products to. So the customer is actually the company that pays for the advertising. They pay for attention. And the cool thing that Facebook's been able to do, which is like unfathomable before, right, with a standard TV advert on a broadcast channel or in a newspaper, you didn't know who was looking at the advert. But because of the innovation that is, the internet, we can actually see the age, the sex, the preferences, the location, and actually a very, very detailed picture on who each user is. And so Facebook's able to say, would you like to target adverts to? And, you name it, right? Who is the avatar for your product? Who do you want to see your advert? And who do you want to try and catch their attention? And you've got this whole digital marketing beast where it's like, okay, well, this is the ideal person we're going after. This is the hook we're going to try and grab their attention with. And this is then the offer that we're going to try and sell. And to do this, we're going to spend $1 million on advertising. We're going to create $3 million worth of revenue. So our ad to revenue spend is 3 to 1. Boom. You then look at net profits, and you hope that revenue cost, that cost within revenue split, means that you make money. And it's been extraordinarily successful, right? You see these huge social media accounts that are punting products all day long. And in some ways, it's the social media business that's the meeting place for this, right? The software product provider. And that's why they get described as digital monopolies or walled gardens, like, oh shit, got kicked off YouTube, banned because of community guidelines. Well, now you can't sell anything to anyone because YouTube won't let you on their platform. Okay, well, that's a problem, right? What if you didn't know what you said wrong? Like, who's to say what is right and wrong? One thing that comes to mind is this extraordinary experience where there was a company called Cambridge Analytica, which had military ties and was a data analysis business that was able to sell its product to political people. The original Trump campaign of 2016 had used Cambridge Analytica in some way. the Brexit vote had used it in some kind of way. And forgive me for glossing over the real story here. You should go and dig it up because it's fascinating. You could use these social media platforms to advance your agenda, whatever that agenda might be. And guess what? They were getting paid. So the social media platform doesn't care. And that's where this whole thing gets a bit messy, right? It's like, who is the customer? Who is paying for this stuff? Well, it doesn't really matter if you have no users, right? So if you have no eyeballs to sell stuff to, then it doesn't, what's your business model? And that's why they make them super gamified. That's why they try and trigger the shit out of you with angry things or sad things. And they're just trying to keep you on their platform as much as possible. And the more they keep you on there, the more adverts. Why am I even interested in Noster? And it's because I'm interested in freedom of speech. Well, and many other things, but like we should be, and this is quite a libertarian philosophy, I guess, we should be able to say what we want, when we want, where we want. And you should be able to feel the feedback for that. Now, if you go up to a bar and you drink a few pints and you tell the bloke next to you, mate, you're a wanker, and you get hit in the face, well, that's real world feedback for saying something that someone didn't like. But when you're in the digital sphere, it's different. You can bitch and moan at someone all day long from a keyboard. It's the classic kind of keyboard warrior type thing. What does this actually mean and where does it take us? Well, Nostr is different. You have the cryptographic key pair, and this account is essentially a purveyor of truth, and they spit information out to all these different relays. And in order to shut down a specific account, you've got to get every single relay to stop posting that piece of information. And in the same way that it's like a game of whack-a-mole, sure, you can go out there and try and find every single Bitcoin node, of which there's thousands and thousands and thousands decentralized across the world, with every single Bitcoin transaction ever on it. In this case, every node, every relay is not actually carrying every single piece of information ever posted on Nostr, but they're very difficult to find. And there's just so many of them that to police this thing is going to be next to impossible. Now, certain clients will be in certain jurisdictions and will come under certain pressure, but you could just choose a different client. So you move from Damus to Primal, or Primal to Amethyst, or Amethyst to Iris. It doesn't matter. And essentially, Nostr flips the switch where the user is no longer the product. You're the user, and you can pay for services that improve your experience, and you can start to actually become your own algorithm. So there is no algorithm. There's nothing trying to wind you up or piss you off, and there's no way to get kicked off. I've heard people in the past talk about how they would, in some ways, find it quite amusing to see, like, where does Twitter draw the line? And they've got, reincarnation 7 of some anonymous profile that they're just shit posting all day long about whatever they want. And eventually they get kicked off. And they're like, oh, there was the line. And it's kind of a game. Whereas like on Nostr, the feel and touch of this thing is so different because you can't be censored. Simple as that. Or at least to my understanding, it's very, very difficult. Someone please correct me and reach out if that's not the case. And what does that mean? You're more accountable to your word. So now when I post something, it's like I actually have to really, truly mean this, because if it goes wrong, in some ways, maybe that physical reverb that is a punch in the face in a bar can actually come back to you. It's like, no, you did say this 5 years ago. It's clearly written here. Now, I do not agree with people who are penalized for a viewpoint they used to have. That's definitely not right. It's like, how do you feel today? And it's okay to be wrong in the past. But it's just a sense of a higher form of accountability. And to bring this full circle, so Nostr.build, shout out to the guys who have created that so far. I'm a happy user. I've spent about 400 Aussie dollars on a year-long membership for 100 gigabytes of data of storage space. And so I'm posting clips of my podcast on Nostr. And in order to do that, you need to use a data storage product. And when you post it on Instagram or on X or on TikTok, they do that for you. They make life as easy as possible to be a user of their platform, but in exchange for what? At what cost? Well, as a content creator, the cost is you're building on someone else's real estate that they can just rug pull you at any time. But actually, for the average user, there is a number of disbenefits that come to mind. So it's like, you might not have many followers, you might not be creating some kind of content business, but you might like using these platforms to get information. So, okay, well, how does the platform play God? How do they decide what's appropriate or inappropriate? Well, just look at the incentive. For example, who are their customers and what are their customers paying them to do? Now, it transpired, the Twitter files blew this wide open. The customers of some of these platforms is actually governments. So hang on a second. So what's the right thing to say, not the right thing to say? And it was brilliantly highlighted during COVID, right? Oh, that's fake news. Says who? Like, it's now been officially confirmed by the powers that be in the White House that there was a lab leak in Wuhan, right? And it didn't come from some kind of wet market somewhere, or whatever the case might have been back in the day that was being spun as the story. But for a long time, people believed that, and that's because their source of information was actually corrupt, completely corrupted to the paying customer. And Nosta's different. Now, beware, like, Nosta also puts the user back in charge of their data in a very cool way. Like, you have more sense of privacy to release to the world. You can reveal to the world more what you want and what you don't want. And that's really cool. But it's also, the responsibility is on you to curate what you do and don't see. And this is where the idea of a web of trust comes in, which I've heard people talking about, the social graph, and how you can now move from Instagram to TikTok to X to Substack equivalents on Nosta with one key pair, and how exciting that is, because all the value that you create in these different walled gardens is now in one place. And it's like a network effect upon a network effect. So for those of us that have been close to the kind of tech world for a number of years now, the standout innovations in some ways has been using digital technology to create network effects, and therefore ride, whether it's your equity investment or as a user getting huge traction on these platforms. It's been a wild ride. And Nosta's going to change that in ways that we still don't quite fully understand. But yeah, it's a strange process. So I'm like, okay, so I've got my public-private key pair. Now I've got Albi. Really impressed with their product, by the way. I've seen a few VC funds that have early stage equity in Albi, and that's just the kind of business that I'd be interested in investing in the future. I perhaps missed the boat slightly there, but you've got your Albi hub, and I've got the wallet Albi Go, and I've pulled it all together. And so now I've got my in my Chrome browser, I've got my Albi extension, which is basically like a password manager. So you trust only one entity with your npub and nsec, and that entity then plugs into other apps in the Nostr ecosystem. And it's just wild, that moment where suddenly your same profile and bio pops up in these different clients. You're like, oh my gosh, this is so powerful, and I'm so excited about it. And so where am I going with all this? The point is like, you got your little Albi plugin, and now you're like, okay, I'm going to go onto Primal, and I've got all these different clips that I've chopped out, and Pat and Michael have helped me edit, and I want to post them. It's like, well, hang on, I haven't figured this stuff out yet, by the way. Like, when's the best time of day to post? Is there the right time of day? Should you repost everything? Should you repost everything 3 or 4 times? There is no algorithm, right? It's a whole new world. I'm going to close this section of the solo pod up with a shout out to Tiggs who brought this up recently, and it's something really cool. So when I zap on Nosta, I'm sending 1,000 sats each time, which is give or take $1. And I tend to like things when it's just like made me giggle, but like when I see something, I'm like, oh, that helped me learn something. I'm like, boom, send some sats. And you can have a phrase that goes with the sats, like a comment. It's often like coffee on me or let's go. And I've just put the Jake Woodhouse podcast. And so each time I zap, especially if my 1,000 sats is the largest zap to a post, suddenly the Jake Woodhouse podcast is written at the bottom of all of these posts. And it's like an advertising billboard. And you think, oh, wow, that's interesting. How might that work? And I don't know if that's like helped anyone find my profile. I haven't got any data yet to back this up as like how it actually functions as a marketing exercise. But imagine a world in which you build a publishing machine that becomes like a digital fortress for pumping out information that is decentralized, uncensorable, in sync with its audience in a value for value manner, which is actually like a matched incentive alignment. It's like, we're paying you for the information you're creating. And that to me is very, very exciting. And we're going to see different products pop out of that in ways that we didn't expect. We'll see lots of growth. It's the macro scenario is interesting. Like, Elon Musk is corruptible, right? X is corruptible. It's absolutely a matter of time, and it's a question of when, not if, they start some kind of renewed pressure to rein in freedom of speech. And that funny phrase of like, freedom of speech is one thing, but it doesn't mean you get freedom of reach. And so these guys on the back end, like Zuckerberg is a big example of this, huge controlling stake in his business still. He is Rome, as someone I heard describe him recently. Like the amount of users that guy has on active businesses of his every day is insane. And so his agenda is whatever, right or wrong, he's able to infiltrate it in some way. And so is that right? Is that wrong? Well, in some senses, you're playing on their turf. It's a private business. You're on their land. It's like being a leaseholder in a office block and you're a business there. If you piss off the landlord, they're just going to kick you out. Same thing. Whereas with Nostr, it's different. You're actually building a piece of digital real estate that is yours. And it's very cheap to maintain. As long as you look after the NSEC and no one steals it from you, it's yours forever, providing the public service that's required to keep the Nostr network growing and getting stronger. And I still haven't fully figured that bit out. I'd love to learn more about like how relays actually work and the business models behind them to make sure this is actually sustainable. But yeah, what an interesting insight to suddenly be in a situation where, like, okay, we want to post this content on Nostr. How do we actually do it? Well, to do it, we have to use something like Nostr.build. There was another product that came up recently called Satellite.earth, where basically it's like uploading something to your Google Drive or to your Dropbox, and then you click a button and it pushes it out onto the Nostr network. And it just sits in that data storage. And actually you can start to see statistics and how many people have viewed it, what unique views turned up and what didn't. And what's wild is that it's still so early. There's not even like an aggregation platform or feature that Nostr.build have created where I can't see how many views I generate with my content from month to month or week to week in aggregate. And so I get very excited as a content creator who's played around in this space for a number of years about like, well, what's going to be created next? And businesses that come to mind in the past is obviously the actual social media platforms themselves. What's the next Instagram? Well, maybe it's Nostr, and it's Nostr with a combination of these tools that's just better. And as soon as these guys realize, in my opinion, like what's the biggest fear of a lot of these content creators? Well, it's been switched off. And now they've got all this sunk cost into their current audience, yes, but at some point that will flip. And it's kind of like fund managers in Bitcoin. For a long time, the career risk as being, oh, you can't put Bitcoin in a portfolio because the career risk is too high. Whereas now it's like, why haven't you got Bitcoin in there? And the same thing, in my opinion, is going to happen with Nostr in the future.